Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a unique radio adventure. Welcome to Tombstone, Arizona, the town too tough to die. And we have a radio adventure for you from the Tombstone Monument Ranch. It is Tales of Old Tombstone. So enjoy your tour around the town, and gentlemen, check your guns. Ladies, watch your hats. But we have some good programming, good shows, and some stories from that town. Welcome to Tombstone.
To the town of our free rode a stranger one fine day. Hardly spoke to folks around him, didn't have too much to say. No one dared to ask his business, no one dared to make a slip. The stranger there among them had a big iron on his hip, big iron on his hip.
Welcome to Tales of Old Tombstone. Today we have with us two experts on the history of Tombstone and some of its great Western characters. We're here today with Bob Boze and Chris Enss, and we are going to have a great time talking about Kate Elder, Tombstone, and the Old West. So, Chris, welcome to the show. I think this is your first appearance with Bob and I on Tales of Old Tombstone.
It is. Thank you, gentlemen, so much for inviting me to take part.
So, Chris, we were talking before the show today that you and Bob share an alma mater. Is it correct that you went to the University of Arizona, that you are a Wildcat?
I did go to the University of Arizona. I loved my time there. Started doing stand-up comedy there when I was in college and worked at Gentle Ben's and a bunch of other places around Tucson the whole time I was in college. It was a great time.
That's fantastic. No, I didn't know this about you. What years are we talking about? Do you mind saying?
83 to 86.
Okay, so yeah, I was there in the 60s. So I missed this Gentle Ben's thing. I was there, of course, and Bay Horse Tavern Dudes and Oxbow, all those places, because I was in a band. But that's so interesting that we had that in common.
So, also, Chris, you are an Arizonan. You were, didn't you live in Sierra Vista for a while before going to the U of A?
Most certainly. My father was in the military, and we were stationed in Sierra Vista in the mid-'70s, and went to high school there, graduated from Buena High School, and was not too terribly far, of course. Sierra Vista is not very far, and Fort Huachuca is not very far from Tombstone. Sadly to say, when I was growing up around there, I mean, I knew of the history of Tombstone, and we spent some time around there, but I can't say that the time that I spent around the Tombstone area was based solely on the history of the area. There's some great makeout roads down there. So when when anybody was ever saying, "Hey, this is the route that Earp took when they were on the Vendetta ride," we just thought, "Well, that's fine, that's great, but you can make out right down here, and no one will ever find you." So
that is fantastic. That's what I love about you, Chris. You always bring it. That's just fantastic. Thank you.
So, Chris, did your family ever take you over to Tombstone? Did you get a taste of history or an interest of it when you were growing up in Cochise County in southern Arizona?
I most certainly did. I had a wonderful history teacher, and she really was instrumental in helping me to fall in love with history, and certainly that entire area. I mean, you can't be at Fort Huachuca and not absorb the history, not wander into Tombstone and just be in the midst of history that's so thick you have to wipe it away like a cobweb. So yeah, I spent a lot of time there, most certainly. Birdcage Theater, just walking up and down Allen Street. It was a good time.
So it was a little simpler times in Tombstone in the 1970s, and of course there was a core of men and women who were keeping Tombstone alive as a destination, and writing a lot about the Earps and Doc Holliday at the time. Did you ever expect that you would become an author and write about the Earps and Doc Holliday when you were growing up there at Fort Huachuca and Sierra Vista?
Absolutely not. It was the furthest thing from my mind. My whole idea was I was going to just make my name in stand-up comedy. was even back then. Even going to, I did a couple of years at Cochise College, junior college there in Sierra Vista, and my thought was always pursuing a career in comedy. But comedy is so subjective, and history is not necessarily. It's arguable, but it's not subjective.
Well, I would have to disagree with that. I think humor. I think history is hilarious, but most historians are not. And what you bring to the discipline is a very clever way to bring out the humor, which is missing in so many dry tomes that we read.
Well, there's so much about what took place in the American frontier that I think we don't embrace as those people having human instincts and human emotions. We sometimes, when you're writing about history, you take that equation out of the people that you're focusing on, and you just think of them as dates and places, and they were here at this time and there at this time. And in particular, when it comes to the relationship of Kate Elder and Doc Holliday, I always saw that as these two people in love, but having this, push me, pull me relationship, this volatile relationship. I liken it to, if they were alive today, they would be Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. So,
that's incredible. That's an incredible, and I love how you make that comparison into a contemporary time. Well, take us back with Kate and how they met, and give us a little taste of their relationship.
Well, they meet in in St. Louis in 1872. He's 21. She is 17, 18 at the time. And she's already working as a prostitute in St. Louis. And that's one of the things, and God bless Stuart Rosebrook, because when I was working on the book about Kate, he always said, you got to keep in mind she was a businesswoman, which she certainly was. She was very business-minded even in her teenage years. She was a working gal. She never stopped being a working gal the whole time she was with Doc. And when I say working gal, she was a prostitute. She didn't leave that particular profession, nor did she ever claim to be an actress or anything other than what she was, which I always appreciated about Kate. She didn't hide behind the fact. She didn't say, no, I'm a dancer, I'm an entertainer. She was.
Yeah, we know why it's Paramar.
Right. She was a soiled dove and made no excuses about what she was. This is what she was. It was a valuable commodity in the West, and she was pleased to be able to be of service to whomever wanted to help her along the way. And so when she meets Doc, Doc is in St. Louis. He's already graduated from dental school, and he's in St. Louis working with one of his buddies that he went to college with, and they're working there in St. Louis, and that's when she meets Doc. And that begins that 15-year relationship that the two of them have, that's on again, off again. And I found it fascinating when I was working on the book and how much I could appreciate how Kate felt about Doc, and as their relationship progressed, how she liked the time that they spent together and didn't want his buddies to come around and take him away from her. I could appreciate that because, my first marriage was quite like that. I think I've mentioned before to you guys that my ex-husband thought monogamy was a type of wood. So I always resented whenever we would have a really good time going, and his college buddies would show up and say, hey, come and go with us. And I would just feel really resentful about the fact that they take off with him for 4 or 5 days, and I wouldn't know what was going on. And I thought about those emotions when I'm writing about Kate, when she's getting her life together with Doc. Now, albeit a lifestyle that I wouldn't want to have. She's still a prostitute. When they're in Las Vegas, New Mexico, she's got a house in Vegas, and she's also got a house in Santa Fe, and goes back and forth. And, he's not such a great gambler, and he certainly can't work the trade in which he was trained. So they struggle together. And I just thought it was amazing how they would then decide we're going to build our own saloon. And at that particular time in Kate's life, when she really has had no firm stability with anybody that she can really say is family, she's got that with Doc. And they just settle into it, and here come the Earps. So I could see why she wouldn't like the Earps. And I could see why the Earps wouldn't like her. She always made a fuss about where you taking off with Doc, which is sadly where she got the name Big Nose, because Wyatt would say, get your big nose out of her business.
So I'm very curious about, most people don't know that Kate was an eyewitness to the so-called gunfight at the OK Corral. It took place right outside of her window. And doesn't she have a great quote when it's over? We have this idea of these macho gunmen shooting and sticking their chest out at the end. And doesn't she say he came into the room and wept or cried? Is that true?
Yeah, she definitely says that when it was all over with, he returns to the room, and a bullet has grazed his hip, she says, and he sits on the side of the bed, and he puts his head in his hands, and he says, "What have we done?"
Wow.
That's not
the side of Doc we see.
But don't you think that that's the way that it would be if you were have a romantic relationship with somebody? You would say something to someone that you're romantically involved with that you wouldn't say to the guys.
Oh, yeah.
Certainly he wouldn't have had that kind of response when he is right there in the middle of the street with the Earps. He wouldn't do that. He'd wait till he came back, and then, that adrenaline rush has kind of hit you, and now you're thinking, what the heck just happened? And what can of worms have we opened up with this?
Yep.
Not that Doc would have ever shied away from any of that, but I think in that moment he's thinking, what the heck just happened?
Yes.
And with that, we're going to take a short break where we can thank our sponsors of Tales of Old Tombstone, and we're going to come back and talk more about Kate and Doc and Prescott Tombstone, and also find out a little bit more about how they both came to St. Louis, where they met in 1872.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us for Tales of Old Tombstone, and we've got a lot more great stories. You'll learn something here that you didn't know before. And in Tombstone, of course, we are proud that we are right there at the ranch. Now, there are guest ranches, there are dude ranches, there are resorts, there are show places, but there's no place like Tombstone Monument Ranch. I spoke to Michelle the other day, and she is the honcho who makes it happen, and it is an incredibly unique adventure. It's not just riding a horse here and there and perhaps enjoying the sun. You can have a true inner cowboy experience. You can actually do some of the work that the cowboys did when they were on the working ranch. It's beautiful, it's fun, it's extraordinary. You meet some incredible characters there, and you and your family, or perhaps your corporate group, will find that this will be not only the meeting that they remember, but certainly the experience and the memories they'll share for a long time. So check it out. Just go to the place, go to their stage, see the pictures, see the songs, see the stories. TombstoneMonumentRanch.com, TombstoneMonumentRanch.com. Michelle said, tell them we're ready for them. Come on to Tombstone. We're ready to make it an experience, an adventure just for you.
So we're back with Bob Bosbell and Kate Elder with Chris Enss on Tales of Old Tombstone. And Chris, we were just talking about Kate and Doc and their romantic on and off again relationship that lasted for 15 years. And I found it interesting that you, as we opened the show, we talked a little bit about how you gained interest in writing about Kate Elder. And my curiosity is, how did Doc and Kate get to St. Louis? And at the same time, how did you become interested in writing about her?
Well, I did share how Doc got to St. Louis. He's out of dental school. He goes to St. Louis, where he's got a buddy who's got a practice there, and he works with his buddy there in St. Louis. Now, Kate comes from Iowa. She leaves Iowa in 1862 she leaves in 1867. She's on a steamship. She goes on the steamship where she's a stowaway and goes down the river, gets to St. Louis. And by 1870, she's working in the brothels there in St. Louis. She had some other personal things going on in her life, tried to have a relationship with a gentleman that didn't necessarily work out, but then ends up in the oldest profession in the world, and really is making some good money. And that's when she and Doc meet. Doc is somebody that at that particular time was not a stranger to the brothels. So that's where they first meet.
And do we think he's sick at this point? Do we have when do you know, or Bob, do you know do people first start talking about the fact that Doc Holliday has consumption or tuberculosis?
Is that for me, or are you asking Bob?
You go.
Well, the first instance that I see from the research that Kate, or the research that I've done and what Kate has written, is she recognizes that he's got some problems when they are in Dodge in May of 1878. She recognizes that there's some issue that's really serious with him. I think that she does recognize it in 1875 when they're in Dodge together too, but definitely doesn't register her really that it's serious until 1878.
What I think is so phenomenal is how young they were. She was like, what did you say, 18, 19? He's 22.
Right.
And when they're in Prescott, I think he's 29. It's just, we think of him as a middle 30s, pushing 40, but no, these are young people. They're very young.
Yeah, young people by well, I don't even, because they certainly lived hard lives. I don't think you can be a prostitute working in the district that she was in St. Louis for at least 3 or 4 years prior to meeting Doc, and not have an exterior that looks like you're older than what you are. And Doc looks pretty aged because his health wasn't very good, and they just lived a rough life. And they drank. I mean, it wasn't unusual for them. I mean, that's why sometimes I liken them to Richard Burton and Liz Taylor, just being out in public, getting completely sloshed and yelling at one another, because they did that. They often did that. And he had an attraction to Kate because she could give it to him as well as he gave out. She wasn't afraid to curse at him or come to blows with him. Although I think at a certain point in life, Doc was a little too weak, and if Kate could have taken him with her one good arm. So, but they did exchange blows. It was a volatile relationship. I mean, if they had been living today, they would be arrested for domestic violence on a constant basis. But they always found their way back to one another. That is what I found fascinating, especially when they split. Doc goes on to Tombstone, Kate goes on to Globe, and she decides that he's in Tombstone. This is in 1880, but she goes to visit him in March of 1881, and that's because he's written a letter to her saying, "Could you come and see me?" So
interesting,
So no matter how often they fought with one another, they always found their way back again to each other. And they weren't necessarily good for each other, but for a little bit of time they had a good time together, because they liked to drink. and they like to stay out all night, and so they had that in common.
And when do they last see each other? When does the wasn't there a rumor that she saw him at the end, or is that just a rumor?
No, she leaves Tombstone in November of '81, and then she gets a letter from Doc in '87, and he tells her, "Listen, I'm not well. I am in Glenwood Springs." And so the following month, she goes out to be with him, and she takes him to her brother's home, who's just 20 miles away in a place called Penny Hot Springs, thinking that that's going to be good for his health too. She's going to try to do whatever she can to restore his health. And then doesn't work. She takes him back to Hotel Glenwood in November of '87, and he passes away not too long after that.
So let's fast forward a little bit. Now she's in the Prescott Pioneers home. She's lived a long life. It's like 1940, right? I mean, she's seen the movies that she's been to the theater to see herself portrayed. Is that a fair thing to say?
Yeah, no, that definitely is a fair thing to be able to say. But, I think if you go to the movies and you see yourself portrayed as Linda Darnell, you're okay. You're all right. But having them say that Doc was a surgeon, was a bit much for her. She always, even prior to getting to the senior home there, she always wanted someone to purchase her story, but no one would pay her the big bucks that she thought it was worth. And she was really annoyed by that, because she always thought, you're willing to listen to Wyatt, but you're not willing to listen to what I have to say. And that's something that always has bugged me about Kate's story, and how people say, well, she's an old woman remembering these things. Certainly she's not going to remember anything correctly, but the counter to that was Earp was an old man too when he was telling his story. So I think that she should have her voice heard just as well as any of the others in that particular setting. I mean, she outlived them all. Now, can you say that everything that Kate says is absolute gospel? I don't think that you can. I mean, I think in every story that you're telling, or every memoir that you read, there's always some. I mean, you can't even listen to our president nowadays and hear, what he's either been a truck driver, or his uncle was eaten by cannibals, and that has to be corrected. I think she's telling her story from what she remembers, which is why the book is called According to Kate. This is what she says.
That's a brilliant title, by the way. Just very, very glancing. Nobody would. We talk about arguing over headline stuff, and there's first line. That's the first thing that everybody thinks of, and then there's second line, third line. Well, According to Kate is about 10th line. That's what makes it so smart, is that it covers all that territory that you just talked about, which is well, I mean, this is her truth, according to Kate.
Right, it's her truth, and one of the things that I just always struck me about her continuing to be a businesswoman was, before she leaves Tombstone, and there's lots of trouble in Tombstone. The Earps don't like her. Ringo says, Johnny Ringo comes to visit her and says, you got to get out of town. They don't like you. At this point, she knows they don't like her. I mean, her hotel in Globe was burned down, and she suspected that the Earps had something to do with that. And so there's no love lost between the two of them. And so when Ringo says, you got to get out of here, they're coming for you, she says, I don't have any money to get out of here with. I've got nothing. Well, he gives her money. I mean, he comes to visit her a couple of times, and he gives her money. And I love when in her journal, she writes, Ringo came to see me twice and gave me money, and I gave him a tumble both times. Which means, he didn't just give her anything. She had to fight for it. She had to work for that money. So I love it. Gave him a tumble both times. So she's a working gal right up into then. I'm going to get out of here on my own steam. Nobody's giving me anything.
Just curious, any interest from Hollywood on your story? It seems like it would make a perfect story for the times we live in now.
Well, there has been interest from Melissa McCarthy's company. Melissa McCarthy owns Big Nose Kate Whiskey, and Big Nose Kate Whiskey, every time a bottle goes out, a book, according to Kate, goes out with it.
Oh, what a great partnership. That's fantastic. And she has the sense of humor that would give it the gravitas it needs.
Right. And she's, Melissa McCarthy is absolutely gorgeous. And I think she'd do very well as Kate because she's got that, she doesn't have that tiny little model build that you see a lot whenever they cast, whenever they cast Kate in the movies. She's always she looks like a model. Well, Kate wasn't like that. She was a beefy Hungarian girl who loved a potato-based diet, and and it was very evident. And so I think Melissa McCarthy would be great, but it hasn't really gone beyond. Yeah, this would be a great idea. Mostly because you always get that same attitude about westerns in Hollywood, where nobody wants to see them and. Let's call Taylor Sheridan and let him know that, and Kevin Costner and let him know that. I think people do like to see westerns, but you have that big hurdle to get over. But she would be great at it.
Yeah,
she would bring a real authenticity to the role that I think hasn't been seen since. Kirk Douglas was in that. I can't even remember the name of the movie right now, but it was about. Tombstone, the OK Corral. Kirk Douglas played Doc, and not so much that I think he resembled Doc, but that relationship between Kirk Ellis's Doc and the woman who played Kate in that film was spot on because they are fighting all the time, and that's what I appreciated the most about that movie.
That's Kirk Douglas was in Gunfight of the OK Corral.
Gunfight. Yeah, that's it.
With Burt Lancaster.
Burt Lancaster, but that relationship that Kirk has with the woman that plays Kate in that film was
Rhonda Fleming
was spot on. I mean, you talk about bickering all the time and causing one another to be jealous and throwing a fit. That's exactly what it would have been like. Where you would see them. I mean, and there's documentation that Kate writes and have been in other works that the two of them would be fighting in public, and they would split up at 3:00 in the morning. He'd go his way, she'd go hers. He'd try to get back in the room. He'd have the door locked. He'd get the room first. He'd have the door locked, and she'd bust it down, and then he'd crack her over the head with the butt of his gun and knock her out. And you'd think,
that's right, Amber Heard and Johnny Depp.
All right. How do these two? And then you would see them the next day. In the afternoon, they'd be walking down the street holding hands.
Yeah.
You think, what the heck? You two people don't need to be together, but they were together, and they found something in one another that, like I said, it certainly isn't a relationship that I would want to have, but it was something that they liked in one another because, like I said, Doc kept calling for her, kept sending her letters saying, please give me. He writes her a letter. At the end of June 1881, when she's in Globe and says, "Come spend 4th of July with me."
Wow!
And that's where we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back and talk about Kate and Doc and Tombstone and what other new books you've been working on, and we'll be right back on Tales of Old Tombstone.
Hi, this is Bob Bosbell, and if you want to have an inside track on two of the most famous characters in the West, that would be Wyatt Earp and his compadre, Doc Holliday, then you need to pick up The Illustrated Life and Times of Wyatt Earp and The Illustrated Life and Times of Doc Holliday, revised 3rd edition. Now, these are books that I first published back in 1993, They've been in the fourth, fifth edition. They keep selling out, and there's a reason. I included the best maps and the best timeline to give you an overview of who these guys really were. And that means the truth, warts and all. I don't duck any of the stuff because these are controversial cats, you may know, if you've ever seen a movie on them. But I've heavily, profusely illustrated. I've updated them. There's a couple of mistakes that were made, or new evidence has come out, and in each edition, I've updated it and made them better. So check it out. That's Bob Bell's Illustrated Life and Times of Wyatt Earp and the Illustrated Life and Times of Doc Holliday, both available to order with an autograph at the66kids.com. And I guarantee that if my signature is in these books someday, they'll be worth the cover price.
We're back on Tales of Old Tombstone with Bob Bell and Chris Enss, and we are talking about Kate Elder and Doc Holliday and their time in Tombstone. We were just talking about Doc's pining for Kate, missing her. He's living down in Tombstone in the summer of 1881. Chris, take us back to that time and how the two of them end up in Tombstone in the most historic era.
Well, as I said, they're back and forth on a constant basis, and Doc writes a letter to Kate asking her to join him for Independence Day on the 4th of July, and she does, and the two of them have an okay time, but they end up that evening having this gigantic fight, and they're both just fall down drunk, and she's arrested the following morning on July 5th, and they start asking her. They ask her all kinds of questions. They bring her in, and they want to know, what she knows about any kind of a robbery of a stage. That they think Doc has had something, that the authorities think Doc has had something to do with. Kate suspected he had something to do with it too, but she doesn't say, yeah, he's the guy who did it. I mean, she's hung over. It's early in the morning. She's hung over. She's been fighting with Doc, and she's ticked at him. So the things that she says about him when she's being questioned are not necessarily flattering, and she does sign this affidavit that says, yeah, I'm pretty sure that he's involved in this robbery. She doesn't mean it. Like I said, I mean, you're drunk. You just want to go to bed. You've been fighting. You've been crying. I hate him. I'm sure she got there and said, I hate him. Yeah, what do you want me to sign? But the next day she recants all of that and says, none of it's true. None of that ever happened. You should never have been bothering me because I was drunk. She ends up then going back to Globe, and that's when she finds that her boarding house, we use that term loosely, her boarding house has been set on fire. And she's there trying to get her life back together. And then she gets another letter from Doc, even after she's accused him what he's done, and he's ticked off at her about that, and she's still mad at him. He still writes her and says, come out here. Come, I miss you. Come back. And so that's in September of 81. And the two of them are hanging out in Tucson. And they're having a good time in Tucson. They're going to gambling halls, and the two of them are just spending a lot of time together. And that's when Morgan rides in. He rides into Tucson on October 25th, 1881, looking for Doc. And that's when he says, tells him what's going on in Tombstone. And Doc says, oh, well, Kate, you don't have to go along with this. Shouldn't you go on back to Globe? And she says, the hell I will. I'm going with you. Again, I don't think she so much wanted to know what was going on in Tombstone as much as she did, here's another Earp taking off with my guy. We've been having a good time here, and I'm not going to let you forget it, and I'm not going to let you go away with the Earps by yourself. So I'll go with you and Morgan, and we'll head back to Tombstone. And like I said, I mean, it's always easy to parse out when they did what when, but always I go back to that human connection, that emotion that they had for one another. He wanted her or he didn't want her. He would kick her out whenever, and then she would come back, and because she wanted to be wanted by him. And, he pretty much pulled the strings emotionally when it came to Kate, and she jumped whenever he called, but then would just be really upset with him that she would be discarded as easily as that. And so that's why I think she kept coming back to Tombstone. I'll show you Earps. Who do you think's who's got the bigger hold on him, you or me? So I think it was a battle too in emotions with the Earps as much as it was with Doc.
So if we were going to go to Tombstone and we were going to take a walking tour of Kate Elder's life in Tombstone, and how many months do we actually think, how long does she live in Tombstone? And if we were going to visit where she lived and walked and plied her trade, where would we go?
Oh, I think if you put it all together, I think you'd be lucky if Kate was really in Tombstone longer than 9-10 months together. I think definitely going over to the birdcage. She had a connection with the women that worked at the birdcage. She understood that lifestyle. So being able to go to the birdcage was a little like feeling as though she had a commonality with something. She definitely didn't feel that when she was with any of the Earp women. I think going over to the Oriental, she liked spending time at the Oriental. I think those two places would be the top spots for her.
I think the place that's so riveting is that, in fact, I think it's the linchpin to understanding the OK Corral is Doc and Kate are boarding at the Fly's boarding house. And I don't know if they planned it or not, but the Cowboys being out in his side yard is what, to me, launched the fight, because they were essentially waiting for him to show up. And I love the line where she reports that somebody comes down to wake him up and say that, I, Clanton's looking for you. And I believe the quote is, if I live long enough, he'll see me.
That's right.
That's
right. That's right.
Great quote. And I think that the Earps and Holliday are coming down the street and to confront them, and they don't know exactly where they are. And I believe that when Doc says, well, they're in my side yard, they're waiting for me to come home so they can kill me. And that's when he pulls out the shotgun, which Virgil told him to keep under his coat. And that's when everything goes south.
Can I ask one question to both of you? Is it in September or October of 1881 that Morgan comes to Tucson to ask Doc to return to town?
That's the 25th. It's the day before the fight, isn't that right?
Yeah, according to Kate, it's October 25.
Okay.
So they come back on a freight train to Benson.
Yeah.
And come back, and everything just kind of the stars align. It was just everything that could go wrong did go wrong, and led to a tragedy which became a legend.
And he already has a room at Fly's, so her being with him at his room is, there's nothing unusual about that. I mean, oftentimes throughout the course of their relationship, wherever they traveled, they would register as Mr. and Mrs. So
yeah,
and I think that's one of the things that from the dramatic movies of Kate and Doc, and no one's ever really done the mini series that really could give you more depth. Everything gets squeezed, right? Everything gets compressed in terms of time, and so I can't recall the fact that in many of the dramatic interpretations of the shootout at the OK Corral that they're out of town, that someone has to go get them, that they've been on a gambling spree in Tucson.
Yeah, and I think you're right in saying that all of that has to be compressed. I mean, good golly, there was so much going on at the time. and I don't think, but I love the idea about doing a mini series about it, being able to include these little items that you didn't know about. I think that would be that's brilliant. What are you going to do with that, Stuart? You should do something with that. That's a brilliant idea.
Well, it starts here today. We have the brain trust right here to do it. And it does. I think that the deeper these relationships, I think that anyone who's written about them or has tried to interpret them dramatically, we get different angles of the women of Tombstone and what's happening there so quickly. The fact that so much happens within that 24 hours of October 25th, October 26th, makes it even more dramatic to me that they return, that they have to return by train and then probably catch a wagon or a stage or buckboard or horseback from Benson into Tombstone. So arriving there that evening, people are up drinking all night, gambling. It does lead to the explosive events of October 26, 1881.
One of the things, too, that I wanted to point out is whenever you do watch films about the relationship between Kate and Doc, you always get the impression that Doc was supporting Kate. And I don't think that was anywhere near the way that it was. I mean, Kate was always a working gal. She always had money. She was always plying her trade. Doc was not such a great gambler all the time, and as I said, could not pursue his profession because of his health. And if anything, she was the one supporting him. So I think sometimes when he called her to be with him, there was a little bit more than just emotions tied with it. I think there's some finances that were involved as well.
Yeah. Well, good luck to Melissa McCarthy. That is a great project. I hope she follows through. You got a great story here. It needs to be told, and this is the time to tell it.
Amen.
Well, Chris, we're going to have you back on Tales of Old Tombstone to go part 2 on Kate, her life after Tombstone. But before we close out this episode, tell us a little bit about what you are writing about right now, what you've just published, and where people can find your books.
Well, the doctor was a woman. The stories of the first female physicians, the frontier, that came out in February. I have a book coming out in October called Tillman, the legendary lawman, story of the legendary lawman and the woman who inspired him. Great cover of the book, by the way. Can't wait for everybody to see that. And then I'm working on a couple of books right now. One that I'm working on today is about Hollywood cowgirl stunt women, and the first stunt people in Hollywood were women. They were the ones who did a lot of the early stunts in the westerns because they sat lighter in the saddle than the men, and they were a little bit more agile. And I had no idea that the first action adventure thrillers that women starred in as the stunt women were all railroad thrillers. And so you have people like Helen Gibson, was this phenomenal stunt woman who starred in those, and she was married to Hoot Gibson. And Hoot was a stand-in for Tom Mix, but a lot of times it was Helen who came in and did some of those stunts as well for Tom.
We can't wait to read that. And where can people buy your books, Chris?
They are available everywhere, and you can get them through Amazon. You can get them through BarnesandNoble.com. You can always email me wanting to know where the books are, but they're everywhere.
And do you have a website?
I do have a website. Let's talk about that. It's chrisenss.com. That's ChrisEnss.com. And love to have people come by and take a look at the site and drop by. I do a book giveaway every month. And this month we're giving away The Principles of Posse Management. how to use the management skills that they used to put the posses together in the Old West in business today.
Well, all right, Chris. Well, thank you very much for being on this episode of Tales of Old Tombstone. You're going to be a frequent guest. So thank you, and thanks, Bob, for and we will see you back here next week on Tales of Old Tombstone.
Big iron on his head. Big iron, big iron. When he tried to match the ranger with the big iron on his hip. Big iron on his head.